The wind over the scrapyard moon of Ethelgard did not just blow. It screamed. It was a physical weight, a barrage of ionized sleet and frozen methane that hammered against the precarious structure of Relay Tower 4. 90 meters above the churning, acidic mud of the surface. Silas Caney clamped his magnetic boots to the vibrating strut and narrowed his eyes against the glare of his helmet's heads-up display. The aurora borealis here was a violent bruise of neon violet and sick green, churning in the upper atmosphere like oil on water. It threw long, manic shadows across the miles of rusted hulks below, starships that had died centuries ago, stripped of their dignity and left to rot in the dark. Silas adjusted the torque on his hydro spanner. His hands were steady. They were always steady. "I am the wall that divides the noise from the silence," he recited silently, the words falling into the rhythm of his breathing. "I am the vessel sealed. I am the void that does not want." It was the first catechism of the sanctum. He had not set foot in a sanctum monastery for 5 years, not since he had bought his freedom with a lifetime of savings and a signature on a non-disclosure agreement. But the discipline remained. It was the only thing keeping him alive on a moon where the atmospheric pressure tried to crush his lungs and the solitude tried to crush his mind. He focused on the fused coupling before him. The relay tower was old, pre-imperial tech, and the storm had fried the primary junction. If he did not fix it within the hour, the perimeter sensors for his sector would fail, and the scavengers, automated and flesh and blood alike, would come picking at the bones of his sanctuary. He twisted the spanner. The metal groaned, then gave. A spark of blue plasma spat out, hissing against his suit's shielding. Focus, purity and function. His suit sensors pinged, a low, rhythmic tone in his ear. Silas paused, his hand hovering over the exposed circuitry. It was not a weather warning. It was a signal intercept, bleeding through the chaotic static of the storm. He tapped the side of his helmet, filtering the audio. The sanctum had trained him to hear whispers in a crowd, to isolate the sound of sin or sedition. This was neither. This was something that should not exist in this sector of the galaxy. It was a distress beacon, but it was broadcasting on a forbidden frequency band, the kind reserved for high-yield biological containment or imperial black ops. Silas frowned, his thick eyebrows knitting together behind his faceplate. He watched the waveform dance on his visor. It was jagged, desperate. But underneath the standard digital cry for help, there was a secondary layer of data. It looked like a heartbeat, not a human heartbeat. It was too fast, too hot. The thermal signature encoded in the signal was spiking off the charts. "Bioheat," he whispered, the word feeling strange in his mouth. He adjusted the gain. The signal was weak, originating from the Razor Flats, a treacherous expanse of crystalline mud about 3 miles east of his position. The encryption weaving through the distress call was military grade, but the underlying carrier wave felt organic. It felt primal. Silas looked back at the open panel of the relay tower. He should finish the repair. He should descend to his bunker, lock the blast doors, and chant the evening vespers until the storm passed. That was the safe choice. That was the choice of a man who kept his vows. But the signal pulsed again, a digital gasp for air, biothermal spikes consistent with draconic physiology. His suit's tactical computer scrolled across his vision in red text. Silas froze. Draconic. The word belonged in history books and propaganda films, not on a salvage moon at the edge of known space. The dragons were gone, hunted to extinction or assimilated into the imperial gene bank centuries ago. To see a live signature was impossible. He looked east. The storm was thickening, a wall of neon sleet obscuring the horizon. Somewhere in that frozen hell, something was burning alive. Silas holstered his spanner. He detached the safety line, the magnetic locks on his boots clanking as he shifted his weight. He could not leave a sentient being to die, not even a myth. The sanctum preached detachment, but it also preached the preservation of potential converts. He told himself that was why he was going. He told himself it was duty, not the sudden, terrifying thrill of the unknown. "I am the shield," he murmured, triggering the jump jets on his suit. He leaped from the tower, falling into the screaming wind. The razor flats lived up to their name. The mud here had crystallized into sharp, jagged ridges that could slice through unshielded tires in seconds. Silas navigated his battered all-terrain skiff through the labyrinth, the vehicle's suspension groaning as it climbed over shards of silicate as big as houses. The signal was getting stronger. The heat signature was washing out his thermal sensors, creating a blooming white ghost on his dashboard. He crested a ridge and saw it. It was a diplomatic shuttle, sleek and silver, shaped like a teardrop. It had impacted hard, burying its nose deep into the glassy earth. One wing was sheared off, lying 100 yards back, and the hull was scorched with plasma burns that had nothing to do with atmospheric entry. This ship had been shot down. Silas parked the skiff in the lee of a crystal spire and grabbed his medical kit. He checked the seal on his suit, verified his oxygen reserves, and stepped out into the storm. The heat hit him instantly. Even through his insulated suit, he could feel a radiant warmth emanating from the crash site. It melted the sleet before it could touch the ground, creating a swirling fog of steam that wrapped the wreckage in a ghostly shroud. He approached cautiously, his boots crunching on the glass. The air shimmered. "Hello?" he called out over the external speakers. "This is Silas Kane, salvage tech. Is anyone alive?" No answer, only the hiss of steam and the howl of the wind. He reached the airlock. It was buckled. The emergency release fused. Silas didn't hesitate. He pulled a thermal cutter from his belt and ignited the blade. The plasma torch sliced through the high-grade alloy like butter. He kicked the metal plate inward, and it clanged onto the deck. He stepped inside. The interior was a wreck of luxury and violence. Silk tapestries were torn, floating in the zero gravity of the failed artificial environment. Debris floated in the air, shards of wine glasses, data slates, and feathers. Feathers? Silas pushed deeper into the shuttle, toward the cockpit. The heat was intense here, triggering the cooling fans in his suit to whine at maximum capacity. He found her in the pilot's seat. Silas stopped, his breath catching in his throat. He had seen holograms of the dragon-blooded, the ancient aristocracy that once ruled the stars before the empire rose. He had seen the statues, but nothing prepared him for the reality of the creature slumped before him. She was humanoid, but on a scale that made him feel small. Even seated, her height was apparent. Her skin was a pale alabaster gold, interrupted by ridges of iridescent scales that ran along her shoulders, down her arms, and across her cheekbones like living armor. From her temples, 2 sweeping horns curled back, dark as obsidian and etched with glowing runes that pulsed with a faint, dying light. But it was her wings that drew his eye. They were vast, folded tight against her back in the cramped cockpit, the membranes bruised and torn. One was bent at a sickening angle. She was dying. He didn't need a medical scanner to tell him that. The air around her was vibrating with thermal energy. Her body was a furnace. Silas moved forward, his training taking over. Check airways, check circulation, stabilize. He knelt beside the chair. The heat was radiant, a physical force pushing against him. He raised a hand to check for a pulse at her neck, then stopped inches from her skin. Panic flared in his chest, a cold, sharp spike of fear that had nothing to do with the alien physiology and everything to do with himself. The vow, to touch with intent, to feel the warmth of another. The sanctum's teachings were rigid. Contact was the gateway to corruption. Flesh was the trap. He had sworn to abstain, to keep his energy sealed within his own circuit. He looked at her skin. It glowed with a subterranean fever. If he touched her, even through the gloves, he would feel it. The life, the fire. Do not be a fool, he hissed at himself. She is a casualty. You are a mechanic. Fix the problem. He opened his medical kit, his hands shaking slightly. He pulled out a canister of medical nanogel and a thermal blanket. He could do this without skin-to-skin contact. He had to. He sprayed the nanogel over the worst of her wounds, a deep gash in her side where a piece of the console had pierced her flight suit. The gel hissed as it hit her skin, sealing the wound instantly. She flinched, a low guttural sound vibrating in her throat. But she did not wake. Her pulse was erratic. He watched the biometric readout on his scanner. It wasn't just beating, it was resetting. Every few seconds, her heart rate would plummet to 0, then explode back into a frantic rhythm, as if her body was a reactor trying to restart itself. She needs cooling, Silas realized. She is going critical. He pulled a stabilizing coil from his bag, a heavy copper loop usually used for regulating engine temperatures. It was crude, but it would have to do. He carefully draped it around her shoulders, ensuring it rested on her clothing, not her scales. He activated it. The coil hummed, drawing the excess heat away from her core. She gasped. Her head lolled to the side, and for a second her eyes cracked open. They were vertical slits, burning with liquid gold. She looked at him, but he doubted she saw him. She was seeing ghosts. Her lips moved. A voice, resonant and layered like a chord struck on a cello, filled the small cockpit. She spoke a string of syllables that twisted the air. Silas's universal translator chirped, scrolling through dialects at impossible speed. It failed to lock onto the syntax. The words were too old. Then, for a fraction of a second, a single word flashed on his HUD in bright yellow text. Bond. Then the word vanished, replaced by error. Syntax unknown. Bond? Silas thought. A diplomatic term? A prisoner restraint? The woman's eyes rolled back, and she slumped against the restraints. The fever was winning. The stabilizing coil was already hot to the touch, struggling to keep up with her internal output. He could not treat her here. The hull was breached, and the storm was tearing the ship apart. He had to get her to the shelter. Silas looked at her. He would have to carry her. There was no other way. He deployed the emergency stretcher from his kit, a floating grav pallet. He maneuvered it next to the chair. "Forgive me," he whispered to the empty air, or perhaps to the god he no longer served but still feared. He reached out, grabbing the terrified fabric of her flight suit at the shoulders and hips. He hoisted her. She was incredibly heavy, her bones dense, her muscle mass far exceeding a human's. He grunted, straining his back, and swung her onto the pallet. For 1 second, as he adjusted her position, the back of his gloved hand brushed against the scales on her neck. The sensation punched through the insulation of his suit. It wasn't just heat. It was a vibration, a frequency that rattled his teeth and made the hair on his arms stand up. It felt like grabbing a live wire. It felt like life. Overwhelming, chaotic, demanding life. Silas snatched his hand back, his heart hammering against his ribs. He breathed hard, staring at his glove as if it were contaminated. "Focus, Silas. Move!" He engaged the grav pallet's drive. It hovered, humming under the weight of the dragon woman. He steered it out of the wreckage, back into the screaming storm, dragging the Firebird toward his monastery of one. The shelter was built into the hollowed-out remains of a terraforming engine. It was half mechanic's bay, half monk's cell. One wall was dominated by racks of pristine tools, organized by size and function, shining under the harsh white work lights. The other wall was bare ferrocrete, adorned only with a string of heavy iron prayer beads hanging from a hook and a single sleeping mat on the floor. It was a cold room. Silas liked the cold. It kept the thoughts slow. He guided the grav pallet into the center of the room and lowered it. The woman was still unconscious, but her thrashing had increased. The thermal blankets he had piled on her were smoking. Silas paced the room. He had turned the environmental controls down to freezing, trying to offset her fever. His breath misted in the air. He checked the diagnostic scanners he had rigged up. Her internal temperature was 104 degrees and climbing. Her biology was fighting a war against itself. "I need to cool her down, but the nanogel isn't working," he muttered, running a hand through his short, graying hair. He went to the workbench and grabbed a canister of industrial coolant. He could try to mist the air, bring the ambient temperature down further. Behind him, a gasp tore through the silence. Silas spun around. The woman was sitting up. She moved with a fluidity that shouldn't have been possible for someone so injured. One moment she was prone, the next she was vertical, her back straight, her wings half unfurled and knocking over a tray of socket wrenches with a deafening clatter. She looked wild. Her hair, a dark violet tangle, floated around her face as if charged with static. Her golden eyes darted around the room, taking in the tools, the beads, the cold metal walls. Finally, they locked on Silas. The gaze hit him like a physical blow. It was ancient. It was hungry. It was the look of a predator that had woken up in a cage and was deciding whether to break the bars or eat the keeper. "Where is this?" she rasped. Her voice was raw, stripping the gears of his translator, standard Imperial Basic but accented with a growl. Silas took a step back, holding his hands up, palms open. "Safe ground. You are on the salvage moon of Ethelgard. I am Silas. I found you in the wreck." She blinked, her eyelids heavy. Ethelgard. Dust and ghosts. She tried to stand, but her legs collapsed. She caught herself on the edge of the pallet, her claws digging into the metal, gouging deep grooves. A shudder went through her, starting at her spine and rippling out to the tips of her wings. The fever struck her again. She doubled over, a sound of pure agony tearing from her throat. It sounded like metal twisting. Silas stepped forward instinctively, then stopped. The heat coming off her was warping the air in the room. The monitor on his wall beeped a radiation warning. "You are burning up," Silas said, his voice tight. "I have medevac protocols. I can call a hospital ship from the sector hub." "No!" she snarled, snapping her head up. "No ships! No Empire!" She was panting, sweat slicking her pale skin. Steam rose from her shoulders. "Someone shot you down," Silas deduced. "They hunt," she gasped. She looked at the door. "The storm. Is it natural?" Silas checked his console. He had been so focused on her he hadn't looked at the weather telemetry. He glanced at the screen and went cold. The barometric pressure was fluctuating in a perfect sine wave. Nature didn't make sine waves. "No," he said slowly. "The weather grid. Someone has overridden the local nodes. They are creating a containment cell, isolating the crash site," she whispered, "to ensure no witnesses." She looked at him then, and her expression shifted. The pride fractured, revealing a terrifying vulnerability. She was terrified, not of the hunters, but of what was happening inside her own body. She gripped her own chest, her knuckles white. "It is the cycle. The impact triggered the cascade early." "Cascade?" Silas asked. "Is that a toxin? A weapon?" She laughed, a short, bitter bark of sound. "A weapon? Yes. Biology is the cruelest weapon. She lunged forward suddenly, grabbing Silas's wrist. He shouted, trying to pull away, but her grip was iron. Her skin burned him through his sleeve. The heat was scorching, invasive. "Listen to me, human," she hissed, pulling him closer. Her eyes were wide, dilated, frantic. "My blood, it burns itself to ash without the stabilizer. It is a failsafe. Engineered." "What do you need?" Silas demanded, panic rising in his throat. "An antidote? I have chemical precursors. I can synthesize—" "No!" she cried out, shaking him. "Not chemicals. It is biothermal. It requires resonance." She stared into his eyes, and he saw the abyss there. He saw a desperation that stripped away all dignity, leaving only the raw will to survive. "I need intercourse to stay alive." The words hung in the freezing air of the shelter, absolute and impossible. Silas recoiled. He didn't just step back, he threw himself backward, tearing his wrist from her grip. He crashed into his workbench, sending a cascade of screwdrivers to the floor. He stared at her, his chest heaving. The words echoed in his mind, profane and absurd. "What?" he whispered. "It is the bond," she gasped, wrapping her arms around herself as another tremor shook her. "The thermal exchange, it requires a mate, a connection, to ground the energy. Without it, my organs liquefy." Silas pressed his back against the cold steel of the shelves. He felt sick. He felt cornered. "I cannot," he stammered. She looked up at him, her vision blurring. "You are a male. You are compatible enough to act as a heat sink. It does not need to be love. It just needs to be." "Stop," Silas commanded, holding up a hand. His voice shook, but it had the steel of the sanctum in it now. "I cannot do that." "Why?" she cried, her voice cracking. "Are you gelded? I took a vow," he shouted. The confession ripped out of him. "I am a sworn initiate of the Hollow Reed. I have taken a vow of celibacy. I have not touched another living being in 10 years. To break it," he couldn't finish the sentence. To break it was to let the chaos back in. To break it was to admit that he was still the man he used to be. The man who destroyed everything he loved with his own selfishness. The woman stared at him. She blinked, the golden fire in her eyes dimming for a second as the absurdity hit her. She let out a laugh. It was a wheezing, broken sound. "I am the last daughter of the Onyx Throne," she whispered. Blood trickling from her nose as the pressure in her skull built. "I am a tactical genius. I have evaded the Black Fleet for 3 years, and I am going to die in a mechanic's shed because my savior is a monk." She winced, curling into a ball on the pallet. The humor vanished, replaced by a groan of pure suffering. "It is funny." She wept. Silas stood frozen. He looked at her, dying, burning, beautiful in a terrifying way. He looked at his prayer beads on the wall. The two worlds were colliding, and he was the focal point. A proximity alarm screamed from his console. Silas and the woman both snapped their heads toward the screen. A red dot was moving across the grid. Fast. It was right outside the blast door. "Hunter drone," Silas said. "The mechanic in him taking over. Class 4. It's scanning for thermal signatures." She looked at him. Her face was gray now, the scales dulling. "It will see me. I am a torch." Silas looked at the blast door. The heavy durasteel began to glow orange in the center. A laser cutter. They weren't knocking. He looked back at the woman. He could let them take her. It would solve his moral crisis. He would keep his vow. He would be safe. But he remembered the feeling of her hand on his wrist, the desperate life in it. He grabbed his pack. He grabbed the thermal cutter. "Now get up," he ordered. She looked at him, dazed. "You will not help me." "I cannot help you with that," Silas said, his jaw tight. "But I will not let them butcher you." He ran to the back of the room, shoving a heavy tool cabinet aside to reveal a dark, rusted grate. "Old service tunnel," he said, kicking the grate loose. "It leads to the subterranean aquifers. The water will mask your thermal signature." The blast door groaned. Molten metal dripped onto the floor. She tried to stand, stumbling. Silas moved to catch her, then hesitated, his hands hovering inches from her burning skin. She saw the hesitation. She gritted her teeth and forced herself upright, her pride flaring one last time. "Lead the way, monk!" she spat. Silas dived into the tunnel. She followed him, dragging her wings, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind them, the blast door imploded. A metallic shriek filled the shelter as a sleek black machine floated into the room, its multiple eyes glowing red, scanning the empty space. They were in the dark now, running. Silas could hear her stumbling behind him in the narrow pipe. He could feel the heat radiating from her back, warming the damp air of the tunnel. She had hours, maybe less. The clock was ticking. The drone was hunting. And the only thing that could save her was the one thing he had sworn never to give. He ran faster, the prayer beads in his pocket clicking against his leg like a countdown. The service tunnels beneath the surface of the scrapyard moon were not built for the living. They were the intestines of a dead industry, a labyrinth of corrugated pipes and forgotten conduits that smelled of rust, stagnant water, and the copper tang of old electricity. The air was thick, recycled too many times by failing scrubbers, but tonight, the air was also cooking. Silas Caney moved through the gloom with the familiarity of a ghost haunting his own house, but the woman stumbling behind him made stealth impossible. She was a reactor in meltdown. The heat radiating from her body was not just a temperature, it was a physical pressure that pushed against the damp walls of the tunnel. As they passed a junction box, Silas watched the plastic casing soften and droop like wet clay. The handrail she gripped for support groaned, the metal expanding rapidly under her touch, shedding flakes of rust that glowed orange for a second before cooling in her wake. Silas checked his suit's internal telemetry. The cooling units were running at 100% capacity, screaming a high-pitched whine that grated against his eardrums. He was sweating. Rivers of perspiration ran down his back, pooling at the base of his spine. It felt like walking into the heart of a star that had decided to take human shape. "We need to stop," Silas said, his voice distorted by the rebreather mask he had forgotten to unclasp. He fumbled with the latch, pulling the mask down to breathe the stale, hot air. He turned to face her. She was leaning against a bulkhead, her wings dragged low, the tips scraping the grime of the floor. In the flickering light of the emergency strips, her skin looked translucent, the intricate network of veins beneath the alabaster surface pulsing with a terrifying luminescence. "I can keep going," she rasped. Her voice was brittle, like dry leaves stepping on glass. "The hunter." The drone is confused by the magnetic interference of the pipes. Silas lied. He did not know if it was true, but he knew she could not take another 100 yards without stabilizing. "Sit. Please." She slid down the wall, leaving a scorch mark on the paint. Her chest heaved. The golden fire in her eyes was dimming, replaced by a glassy, feverish haze. Silas knelt, keeping his distance, 3 feet, the safe zone defined by his tactical display. He opened his medical kit on the damp floor. He had tools for repairing fusion drives and recalibrating servo motors. He had very little for treating a mythical species undergoing a biological catastrophe. He selected a hypodermic injector filled with industrial-grade cryocoolant. It was designed to chill overheated circuitry, but it was non-toxic to humanoids. It was a desperate gamble. "This will be cold," Silas warned. She looked at the needle. then at him. Her lips curled in a faint, delirious sneer. "You think ice can stop a sun? It is this or organ failure," Silas said. His tone clipped to hide his fear. He leaned in, aiming for the soft tissue of her shoulder, between the scales. The heat hit his face like the blast from an open oven door. He held his breath, found the vein, and triggered the injector. The hiss of the coolant entering her system was loud in the silence. For a moment, the relief was visible. Her back arched, her eyes widened, and the terrifying radiance of her skin dimmed to a dull, manageable warmth. She gasped, a sound of pure alleviation. Silas exhaled, sitting back on his heels. "It is working." She shook her head slowly. The relief was already fading. He could see the heat returning, climbing up her neck like a rising tide. "It is a bandage on a hemorrhage," she whispered. "My name is Kaida." Silas paused, capping the empty injector. "Kaida. It means little dragon in the low dialect," she said, her eyes closing. "My father had no imagination, but he had ambition." "You are dragon blood," Silas said. It was an accusation and a question wrapped together. "The histories say your kind was wiped out during the Unification Wars. Politically extinct." "Politically? Yes," Kaida murmured. "Biologically? We were preserved, hidden in the deep vaults, kept as genetic curiosities." She winced, clutching her abdomen. The coolant was gone, burned away by her metabolism in less than 60 seconds. The heat roared back, stronger than before. The water on the floor around her boots began to hiss and turn to steam. Silas scrambled for a neural calming patch. He slapped it onto his own glove, then reached out to apply it to her forehead, trying to dampen the synaptic storm he saw raging on his scanner. The patch turned black and crumbled into ash before it even touched her skin. "Impossible," Silas muttered. He grabbed a bioscanner, a heavy handheld unit used for diagnosing contamination. He pointed it at her chest. The screen flooded with red warnings. "Error. Thermal overload. Unknown biological protocol." Silas threw the scanner down in frustration. It clattered against a pipe. "What are you?" he demanded, his voice echoing in the tunnel. "This isn't just biology. This is engineering. Someone built you to do this." Kaida opened her eyes. The gold was swirling now, molten and chaotic. "I was engineered," she confirmed, her voice gaining a sudden, angry strength. "By the Sorbonne-Kruger cartel. They wanted the strength of the ancients without the free will. They spliced the genome. They created the thermal cycle." "Why?" Silas asked, reaching for another coolant vial, though he knew it was useless. "Control," Kaida spat. She tried to push herself up but slipped, her claws screeching on the metal floor. "If I do not bond, if I do not share the thermal load with a compatible partner. My core temperature rises until my heart bursts. It makes me dependent. It makes me a weapon that needs a user to survive." Silas froze. The horror of it washed over him. It was not a mating cycle. It was a leash. A biological kill switch designed to force submission. He looked at her. Really looked at her. Not as a threat to his vow, but as a masterpiece of cruelty. "They made you to die if you are not used?" Silas asked, the word tasting like bile. Kaida laughed again. That same bitter, jagged sound. Concise. "You sanctum types. You always get to the point. Yes, I am a lock. The bond is the key. Without the key, the lock melts." She looked at him, her gaze challenging. "And you are the only key within 1,000 miles. Monk." Silas stood up, pacing the narrow width of the tunnel. He felt the trap closing around him. The logic was brutal. He had the equipment, his body, to save her. but the cost was the foundation of his entire existence. "I cannot," he said again, but the conviction was thinner this time. Kaida watched him pace. Despite the pain tearing her apart, a flicker of amusement crossed her face. "You pace like a caged wolf," she observed. "For a man who claims to have found peace in nothingness, you carry a lot of noise, Silas." "It is not noise," Silas retorted, stopping to adjust a strap on his suit that didn't need adjusting. "It is discipline." "Discipline," she mocked softly. She gestured vaguely at his tool belt. "You count your wrenches. I watched you in the shelter. You touch them one by one. 1, 2, 3, 4, like prayer beads. And your bed? That mat on the floor? It is the world's saddest throne. You rule over a kingdom of dust and silence." "It keeps me focused," Silas snapped. "Focused on what? Not being human?" Silas spun on her. "You do not understand. The vow is not about denying humanity. It is about protecting it. Protecting it from what? From pleasure? From connection? From destruction?" Silas shouted. The echo of his shout rang in the tunnel, fading into the dripping darkness. Kaida fell silent, watching him with an intensity that burned hotter than her skin. Silas slumped against the opposite wall, the fight draining out of him. He looked at his gloved hands. "I was not always a monk," he said quietly. 10 years ago. I was a structural engineer on the orbital habitats of Ceres. I had a wife. Her name was Lena. Kaida did not speak. She just waited, breathing through the pain. "I loved her," Silas said, "but I did not know how to be a person. I only knew how to be intense. I used her, not physically, not in the way you mean. I used her love as anesthesia. When the grief of the war hit me, I buried myself in her. I used intimacy to silence the noise in my head. It became an addiction. I consumed her emotional reserves until she was hollow. And when she left, I realized I had erased myself in the process." He looked up at Kaida. "The vow of the hollow reed. It is not punishment. It is survival. I swore to seal the vessel so I would never drain another human being again. I cannot break it because I do not trust myself to stop." The confession hung between them, heavy and raw. Kaida shifted, wincing as her wing brushed the wall. "You think you are a black hole," she said softly. "I know I am. You are arrogant." "Silas," she said. He blinked, surprised. "Arrogant? You think your need is so powerful it destroys worlds?" she said. "But maybe you are just a man who was hurt. And maybe a vow that denies your humanity is just another cage, especially if someone else benefits from your denial." "Who benefits?" Silas asked. "The sanctum? Everyone who wants you docile," she said. "A man who wants nothing is easy to rule. Just like a woman who needs intercourse to live is easy to control. We are both prisoners of our own biology. Silas, you chose your cage. Mine was built for me." She tried to stand, her legs trembling violently. "But I will not die in mine." She stumbled. This time, she went down hard. "Kaida!" Silas moved without thinking. The vow vanished. The discipline shattered. He lunged forward, catching her before she hit the grate. His hands gripped her waist and her shoulder. The contact was instant and overwhelming. Heat flooded his palms. It wasn't just temperature, it was electricity. It was a biofeedback loop that slammed into his nervous system like a sledgehammer. He felt her heartbeat in his own chest. He felt the terrifying, racing panic of her blood. And beneath the pain, he felt the pull. It was magnetic. His body recognized hers not as an alien species, but as the missing half of a circuit. The bond she spoke of, it wasn't a metaphor. It was a physical gravity. He wanted to pull her closer. He wanted to wrap himself around the fire and let it burn him down to the bone. It was the most terrifying thing he had ever felt. For 2 seconds, they froze, him holding her leaning into him, the steam rising from where their bodies met. Her eyes locked onto his, wide with shock. She felt it too, the sudden stabilization, the way her heart skipped a beat and then slowed, just for a moment, because he was touching her. Silas gasped and shoved her away. He didn't throw her, but he set her down on a crate with frantic speed, backing away until he hit the opposite wall. He held his hands up, staring at them. They were trembling. She sat on the crate, breathless. The contact had bought her a few minutes of clarity. The fever had receded, just a fraction. Silas stammered. "I am sorry." She looked at him. Her expression was no longer mocking. It was soft and deeply sad. "Do not apologize for saving me from the floor," she said. "I felt it," Silas whispered. "The pull. It is the design," she said. "It seeks an anchor." Silas closed his eyes, fighting the tremors in his arms. "It is too much. I cannot control that." Kaida straightened her flight suit. She looked at him with a fierce, burning sincerity. "Silas, look at me." He opened his eyes. "I need this to live," she said. "But I will not force you. I am not the cartel. I do not take what is not given." She took a breath, and the air shimmered around her lips. "If you say no, if you truly cannot do this, then I will sit here and I will burn until my heart stops. I will choose death over taking consent that is not free." Silas stared at her. He had expected begging. He had expected manipulation. He had not expected honor. That sincerity hit him harder than any seduction could have. It bypassed his defenses. It made the vow feel small and selfish. "My fear." He started, then stopped. He realized his fear had shifted. It was no longer about breaking a rule. It was about the responsibility of holding someone's life in his hands and the terror of doing it wrong. "We have to keep moving," he said hoarse. "We are not safe here." He turned, unable to look at her, and scanned the room they had stumbled into. It was not just a widening of the tunnel. It was a depot. Silas frowned. He raised his wrist light, sweeping the beam across the shadows. The room was stacked high with crates, not the rusted, scavenged containers typical of the moon, but sleek, matte black cargo pods. He walked over to the nearest one and wiped the dust from the label. He froze. "What is it?" Kaida asked, her voice strained but steady. "Imperial Naval Seal," Silas said. "These are high-yield munitions and biotech precursors." He looked around. There were hundreds of crates. "This is a smuggler moon," Kaida said. "No," Silas corrected. "Smugglers use beat-up freighters and bribes. These crates have diplomatic clearance tags. This isn't smuggling. This is a black site. The Empire is using the scrapyard as a warehouse for something off the books." Kaida tried to stand, using the crate for support. She looked at her wrist. Her bracelet, a heavy ornamental cuff made of some dark metal, had cracked when she fell. She pulled at it, grimacing. "It is broken." She snapped the mechanism. The cuff fell away, clattering to the floor. Hidden inside the lining was a small, glowing sliver of crystal, a data shard. She picked it up, her claws clicking against the delicate tech. "I stole this," she said, "from the diplomat's shuttle before I crashed. I thought it was just encryption keys." Silas brought his wrist computer close, slotted in. She slid the shard into his reader. A holographic projection sprang up in the damp air. It was a map. A complex three-dimensional star chart leading to a set of coordinates deep in the core systems. "That is the Ethelgard vector," Silas said, "but the destination. That is the celestial spire, The capital station. Text scrolled beneath the coordinates. Bright red. Senate eyes only. Project Vermilion. Asset status. Unstable. Asset. Kaida read, her voice hollow. That is me. Suddenly, the tunnel's emergency speakers crackled to life. They hadn't worked in 50 years. But now they shrieked with a piercing feedback tone. A voice, synthesized and cold, echoed through the depot. Attention all sectors, priority alert. Biohazard fugitive detected in sub-level 4. Species classification. Redacted. Threat level. Extreme. Silas and Kaida looked up at the rusted speaker grates. Citizens and contractors are ordered to shelter in place. Purge protocols are active. The fugitive is carrying a level 5 contagion. Do not approach. Do not aid. The message repeated. Biohazard. Contagion. They are lying, Silas said. They are erasing me, Kaida said. She looked at the hologram of the capital station. They are not just hunting me. They are scrubbing the record. If I die here, no one will ever know I existed. I will just be a plague outbreak that was neutralized. She looked at Silas. The despair was gone. In its place was a cold, hard rage. I need to get to that station, she said. Silas looked at the crates of munitions. He looked at the dying woman who refused to beg for her life. He looked at the coordinates. The conspiracy was not just about a lost dragon. It was about a biotech cartel, the Imperial Senate, and a secret that required an entire moon to be silenced. If we stay here, we die, Silas said. He walked over to a terminal on the wall, hacking the door controls. There is a cargo skiff docked on the upper platform of this depot, he said, his fingers flying across the keypad. It is likely automated, used for moving these crates. If I can override the nav computer, we can escape the atmosphere. Kaida finished. Silas got the green light. The blast doors at the far end of the depot groaned open. Wind and rain howled into the room, smelling of ozone and sulfur. He turned to Kaida. She was swaying. The adrenaline of the catch was fading, and the fever was climbing the ladder of her spine again. Can you run? He asked. I can fly, she lied. She took a step and nearly folded. Silas was there. He didn't touch her skin this time. He grabbed the fabric of her flight suit at the waist, supporting her weight without making direct contact. Lean on me, he said. They moved toward the open door, into the teeth of the storm. The skiff was there, a heavy, ugly slab of metal floating on magnetic repulsors. Silas threw Kaida onto the deck and jumped into the pilot's well. He hot-wired the ignition sequence, his hands moving with the muscle memory of a lifetime of fixing broken things. The engines roared to life. Silas grabbed the yoke. He looked back at Kaida. She was curled on the deck plates, steam rising from her body to mix with the rain. She was looking at him, her eyes burning holes in the dark. Trust me, Silas shouted over the roar of the thrusters. I chose you, didn't I? She yelled back, her voice barely audible. Silas punched the throttle. The skiff shot forward, blasting out of the depot and into the violent neon-lit sky of the scrapyard moon. As they climbed through the turbulence, Silas felt the vow of the hollow reed trembling in his mind. It wasn't broken yet, but as he looked at the woman burning on the deck, he knew the cracks were spreading, and for the first time in 10 years, he wasn't trying to seal them. Vector 9 was a festering wound in the side of the galaxy, and Silas Caney had never been so happy to see a hive of scum and villainy. The Freeport station orbited a bruised purple gas giant, hanging in the gravity well like a tick gorging itself on trade routes. It was a chaotic tangle of docking spires, neon markets, and illicit refineries where the Empire's laws were treated as mild suggestions rather than absolute commandments. The air inside the station smelled of ozone, frying oil, and unwashed bodies. It was a sensory assault that made Silas's teeth ache. "Hold still," Silas murmured, his fingers hovering inches from Kaida's neck. They were huddled in the shadows of a cargo bay, shielded by a stack of leaking coolant drums. Kaida stood rigid, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. She was burning again. Silas could feel the heat radiating off her skin, a tangible wave that warped the air between them. He was adjusting the projection mesh, a flimsy, illegal piece of tech they had stripped from a dead smuggler back on the moon. It was a collar that projected a holographic glamour, designed to mask high-profile contraband. Currently, it was the only thing hiding Kaida's massive obsidian horns and the folded bulk of her wings. "I am holding still," Kaida hissed through gritted teeth. "It is your hands that are shaking, monk." "My hands do not shake," Silas retorted, though he knew she was right. He tweaked the frequency emitter. The hologram flickered. For a second, the illusion of a tall, human woman with violet hair held firm. Then, a pulse of heat surged from Kaida's collarbone, and the hologram glitched. The image of her horns ghosted into existence, translucent and terrifying, before snapping back to the human disguise. "Your thermal output is interfering with the photon matrix," Silas explained, frustration tightening his chest. "If you spike, the mask drops. If the mask drops, the Imperial patrols will see a dragon. Then we should move fast," Kaida said. She opened her eyes. The gold irises were dull, clouded by the toxins building up in her blood. "I feel like I am walking through a furnace." Silas stepped back, looking her over. To the casual observer, she was just another tall, striking spacer in a stolen flight suit. To him, she was a walking bomb with a faulty timer. "Stay close to me," he ordered. "Do not make eye contact, and for the love of the void, do not set anyone on fire." Kaida gave a weak, dry chuckle. "You are demanding today." "Silas, I liked you better when you were mute." They pushed out into the flow of the market. The crowd was a river of noise. Hawkers shouted prices for synthetic meat and recycled water. Droids buzzed overhead carrying crates, and music throbbed from the open doors of cantinas. A bass-heavy rhythm that seemed to synchronize with the pounding in Silas's head. Imperial stormtroopers in pristine white armor patrolled the upper walkways, their rifles gleaming under the harsh sodium lights. Every time a patrol passed overhead, Silas felt the muscles in his back lock up. He recited the second catechism in his head. Fear is the mind killer. Silence is the shield. But the words felt hollow. Kaida, however, seemed fascinated by the chaos. Despite her pain, her head swiveled, taking in the spectacle of humanity with a mix of confusion and judgment. She stopped abruptly in front of a massive holographic propaganda poster plastered on a bulkhead. It depicted the Emperor, benevolent and stern, with the slogan, "True freedom is found in obedience." She stared at it, blinking slowly. Silas grabbed her elbow. "We cannot stop." She pointed a clawed finger, disguised as a human hand, at the slogan. "That sentence makes no sense. It is a linguistic paradox. How can you be free if you are obeying?" "It is rhetoric." "Kaida," Silas whispered, looking around nervously. "It is stupid," she declared loud enough that a passing fishmonger stared at them. "If I told a hatchling that the sky was the ground, they would bite me. Your emperor treats his subjects like they have brain damage." Silas dragged her away before she could critique the font choice. "You are going to get us killed with literary criticism," he hissed. "I am just saying," she muttered, leaning heavily against him as a wave of dizziness hit her. "If you are going to lie to a population, at least be poetic about it." They found the address deep in the rusted bowels of the station's medical district. It wasn't a hospital. It was a hole in the wall sandwiched between a droid repair shop and a noodle bar. The sign above the door read, Veterinary and Cybernetic Services. No refunds. Silas knocked the code he had been given by a contact at the docks. The door hissed open. The interior smelled of antiseptic and stale cigar smoke. A man was hunched over a workbench, digging into the exposed chest cavity of a cyberhound with a pair of laser forceps. He didn't look up. "We're closed," the man said, "unless you have a Class 3 bleeding event or a bottle of whiskey." "We have a patient," Silas said, stepping inside and dragging Kaida with him, "and she is running hot." The medic turned. Doc Harlan was a small, wiry man with a cybernetic eye that whirred as it focused. He wiped his bloody hands on a stained apron. "Running hot?" Harlan scoffed. "Buddy, everyone in Vector 9 is—" He stopped. His cyber eye had locked onto Kaida. The mechanic in him saw past the glamour mesh instantly. He saw the heat signature. He saw the bone structure. Harlan dropped his forceps. "Lock the door," the medic whispered. Silas hit the panel. The maglock slammed home. Harlan walked around the counter, approaching Kaida with the reverence of an art collector finding a lost masterpiece in a dumpster. "Dragon blood." Harlan breathed. "I thought you were all myths or museum pieces. I am neither," Kaida said, her voice tight with strain. "I am a patient, and I am about to melt your floor." "Get her on the slab," Harlan ordered, snapping into professional mode. Silas helped Kaida onto the metal operating table. As soon as she lay down, the metal began to hiss. Harlan grabbed a scanner and ran it over her torso. The readings made him whistle low and long. "She is cooking from the inside out," Harlan said, looking at the display. "This isn't a fever. It is a biothermal feedback loop. Her endocrine system is dumping localized energy into her core, but there is no release valve. She says she needs intercourse," Silas said, the word feeling heavy and clumsy on his tongue. "To stabilize." Harlan looked at Silas, then back at the readings. He didn't laugh. He nodded. "Technically, yes," Harlan said, tapping the screen. "But calling it intercourse is like calling a warp jump a long drive. It is a biochemical lock. Look here." He pointed to a complex diagram of her nervous system. "Her species was engineered with a dependency," Harlan explained, his tone clinical but fascinated. "It is a safeguard, to prevent her from becoming too powerful. Her body generates this excess thermal energy. The only way to dissipate it is through a specific neurochemical cascade that is triggered during the mating bond. It opens the metabolic vents. Without it, the heat builds up until her organs boil. So it is not—" "Lust?" Silas asked, feeling a strange mixture of relief and horror. "Lust is a desire," Harlan said, lighting a cigar with a small laser torch. "This is a command code written in her DNA. It is a kill switch, kid. And right now, the countdown is at 0 hour." Kaida glared at the ceiling. "I hate being discussed like a broken toaster." Silas looked at Harlan. "Is there a workaround? We heard rumors of a device, a bond simulant." Harlan blew a ring of smoke at the ventilation fan. "Yeah, I have heard of it. The Synapse Bridge. Illegal tech. It mimics the neural feedback of a partner. Tricks the body into thinking the bond has occurred. It dumps the heat without the entanglement." "Where do we find it?" Silas asked. Harlan hesitated. He looked at Kaida, seeing the pain etched around her eyes. He sighed. "There is a broker," Harlan said. "Goes by the name Vex. Operates out of a nightclub called The Pulse on the Promenade. He claims to have a prototype, but Vex is a snake. If he has it, he will want credits. Blood. Or both. We have credits, Silas said, patting the pouch of stolen Imperial chits. Harlan grabbed a hypodermic from a tray. I can give her a suppressant, a cocktail of blockers. It won't fix the problem, but it will buy you maybe 6 hours before she goes critical. After that, he didn't finish the sentence. He jabbed the needle into Kaida's arm. She gasped, her back arching off the table. For a moment, the room grew colder. The shimmering haze around her body faded. Thank you, she whispered, slumping back. Harlan looked at Silas. 6 hours. Monk, if you don't find that device, or if you don't step up to the plate, she is ash. The promenade of Vector 9 was a canyon of light. Holographic dancers 50 feet tall swayed above the crowd, and the bass from the clubs vibrated the deck plates. Silas and Kaida moved through the crush. The suppressant had given her a temporary burst of clarity. She walked beside him, her hand brushing his arm occasionally, not for support but for reassurance. You are quiet, Kaida said. I am thinking, Silas replied, about the medic's diagnosis, about the engineering, Silas admitted, to build a sentient being with a self-destruct mechanism. It is an obscenity. It violates every principle of design. It is efficient, Kaida countered, though her voice was soft. If you want a soldier who cannot rebel, make their survival dependent on your touch. My ancestors were proud. They would not bow to the Empire, so the geneticists made us beg instead. She stopped at a street vendor selling skewers of grilled meat that smelled of spices Silas couldn't name. She stared at the food. I have never eaten street food, she admitted. In the vault, we were fed nutrient paste. Silas bought a skewer. He handed it to her. She took a bite, chewed, and her eyes widened. It is greasy, she said, delighted and spicy. It hurts my tongue. Silas watched her eat. There was grease on her chin. The projection mesh flickered slightly around her ears. In that moment, she wasn't a myth or a biological weapon. She was just a person eating dinner for the first time. He reached out, his thumb brushing the corner of her mouth to wipe away a speck of sauce. His hand froze. He hadn't thought about it. It was a reflex. An intimate, domestic reflex. Kaida stopped chewing. She looked at his hand, then up at his eyes. The air between them charged, thicker than the humidity of the station. Your hand is trembling again, she whispered. Silas pulled his hand back as if he had touched a hot stove. I am sorry. Why? She asked. Because you touched me? Or because you wanted to? Silas looked away, staring at a neon sign advertising discount cyber limbs. Because I do not know the difference anymore. Kaida stepped closer. She lowered her voice, cutting through the noise of the crowd. You treat your vow like a wall. Silas. But walls don't just keep things out. They keep things in. You are afraid that if you open the door, you will not be able to close it again. I am afraid of losing control, Silas confessed. My life is built on order. You are chaos. She smiled, and it wasn't the bitter, sarcastic smile he was used to. It was sad and gentle. Life is chaos. Silas, order is for machines and the dead. She finished the skewer and tossed the stick into a recycler. Come on, Monk, let's go find this machine that can replace a man. The pulse was less a building and more a sensory assault. The entrance was a gaping mouth of black chrome, swallowing a line of patrons dressed in feathers. Chrome and bioluminescent skin grafts. The music inside was a physical force. It was a subsonic thrum that rattled the ribcage. Silas and Kaida pushed their way to the bar. The air was hot, humid with sweat and smoke. Kaida's disguise was holding, but Silas saw the strain in her jaw. The noise was overwhelming her enhanced senses. "We are looking for Vex," Silas shouted to the bartender. A four-armed droid polishing a glass. The droid pointed a thumb toward a VIP booth suspended above the dance floor, enclosed in soundproof glass. They made their way up the gravity stairs. The booth was guarded by two hulking brutes with subdermal armor. Silas flashed the credit chips. The guards stepped aside. Inside the booth, the music was muffled to a dull roar. A man sat on a velvet divan, flanked by two exotic dancers. He was pale, thin, and wore a suit that cost more than Silas's entire life earnings. "Vex," Silas said. The man looked up. His eyes were silver implants, zooming in on them. "The monk and the mystery," Vex drawled. "Word travels fast in the medical district. Harlan has a big mouth." "We are here for the Synapse Bridge," Silas said, keeping his hand near the stun baton on his belt. Vex smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "Rare item," Vex said, "Imperial restricted, but I happen to have one." He gestured to a silver case on the table. Kaida stepped forward, her eyes locked on the case. "Open it." Vex tapped the lid. It hissed open. Inside lay a headset connected to a small pulsating generator. It looked complex, it looked medical, it looked like salvation. "Does it work?" Kaida asked, her voice trembling. "Guaranteed," Vex said. 5,000 credits. Silas tossed the bag of chips onto the table. "Take it." Vex didn't reach for the money. He looked at Kaida, his silver eyes narrowing. "There is just one problem," Vex said. "I ran a scan when you walked in. Your thermal signature, it's off the charts. You're not just sick, darling. You're a walking reactor." He pressed a button on the table. The door to the booth slammed shut. The magnetic locks engaged with a heavy clank. "The Empire pays a lot more than 5,000 credits for a dragon blood fugitive," Vex said, leaning back. "The contractor who hired me said you'd be desperate, said you'd come looking for a miracle." Silas's blood went cold. "It's a trap." The silver case on the table didn't contain a medical device. It contained a stun grenade. Silas saw the red light blinking on the side. "Down!" Silas screamed. He tackled Kaida, throwing them both behind the heavy velvet divan just as the grenade detonated. The explosion blew the glass wall of the booth outward, showering the dance floor below in shards. The concussion wave slammed into Silas, ringing his ears. "Get up!" Silas yelled, hauling Kaida to her feet. The booth was swarming with drones. They dropped from the ceiling vents, small, vicious machines armed with shock prods. Silas didn't think. He reacted. He pulled a localized EMP generator from his belt, a tool he used for disabling security locks, and dialed it to maximum. He threw it into the center of the room. The pulse was silent, but the effect was instant. The drones dropped out of the air like stones. Vex's cybernetic eyes sparked, and he screamed, clawing at his face as his implants short-circuited. "We have to go," Silas shouted. They leaped through the shattered window, falling 20 feet to the crowded dance floor below. Silas activated his gravity boots just before impact, slowing their descent. They landed in a crouch amidst screaming clubgoers. But the trap wasn't just in the booth. The music stopped. The house lights slammed on, blindingly white. From the exits, armored figures poured in. Not stormtroopers, bounty hunters, heavily armed, professional, and looking straight at them. "There she is," one shouted. "Capture only. The client wants her alive." Kaida looked at Silas. The suppressant had worn off. The stress of the explosion had spiked her adrenaline. "I can't hold it," she gasped. Her collar, the projection mesh, sparked and died. The glamour vanished. A collective gasp went through the club. The tall woman with the violet hair was gone. In her place stood the dragon blood, her horns curled high and proud. Her wings, no longer hidden, exploded outward, spanning 12 feet, the membranes glowing with the heat of molten glass. Scales shimmered along her arms and neck, radiant and terrifying. "Monster!" someone screamed. The crowd stampeded. The bounty hunters opened fire. Stun bolts streaked through the air, blue lightning seeking her nervous system. Kaida didn't run. She roared, a sound that shook the bottles behind the bar and swept her wings forward. She wasn't attacking. She was shielding. A group of civilians was trapped against the bar, frozen in terror. Kaida placed herself between them and the hunters. The stun bolts hit her wings, fizzling against the intense heat of her scales. She absorbed the fire, her body shuddering with every impact. Silas saw it. She was dying, burning alive, and yet her first instinct was to protect the people who were screaming at her. He felt a surge of emotion so strong it nearly knocked him over. It wasn't pity, it was awe. He grabbed a heavy mag table and flipped it, creating cover. "Kaida! To me!" he yelled. She turned, her eyes glowing like twin suns. She grabbed the civilians, 2 young humans and a Rhodian, and shoved them toward the kitchen exit. "Go!" she commanded. She collapsed, her knees hitting the floor, and the heat was too much. Her wings dragged. Silas sprinted across the open floor. He fired his grapple line at a heavy lighting rig above the hunters. He retracted the winch. The rig tore loose, crashing down on the bounty hunters in a tangle of sparks and metal. He reached Kaida. He didn't care about the heat. He grabbed her, pulling her arm over his shoulder. "The exit!" Silas yelled. They crashed through the kitchen doors, into the alleyway, leaving the chaos behind. They didn't stop running until they reached the sublevels, finding refuge in a decommissioned water processing plant. The roar of the station was muffled here, replaced by the drip of condensation. Kaida slid down the wall. She didn't have the strength to fold her wings. They lay spread out on the damp concrete, the glow fading to a dull, sickly gray. Silas knelt beside her. He was burned. His flight suit was scorched where he had supported her. His hands were blistered. He didn't feel it. He ripped open his medical kit, but he knew it was empty of anything that mattered. He called Harlan on the encrypted comms. "Doc, we..." "The device was a trap," Silas said, his voice cracking. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Harlan's voice came through, tired and grim. "I was afraid of that. Listen to me. Silas. I am looking at her blood work again. The sample I took." "What?" Silas asked. "She doesn't have time. Silas, she has 1 cycle left. Maybe less. Her cellular walls are beginning to degrade. If she doesn't bond within the hour, the cascade becomes irreversible. Her organs will shut down. She will die in agony." Silas dropped the comm. It clattered on the concrete. He looked at Kaida. She was watching him. She had heard, so she whispered. The end of the line. She closed her eyes, leaning her head back against the wall. She looked incredibly tired, not just physically but spiritually exhausted. "I am sorry, Silas," she said softly. "I dragged you into this. You should have left me on the moon." Silas shook his head. "No." He looked at her. He looked at the woman who had shielded strangers with her own dying body. He looked at the monster who had more humanity than the entire Imperial Senate. He realized then that he couldn't logic his way out of this. There was no schematic to fix this. There was no tool in his belt. There was only a choice. He moved closer. He took off his gloves. His hands were scarred, rough, and trembling. "Kaida," he said. She opened her eyes. When she saw him without his gloves, she flinched. "No," she said. her voice firm despite the pain. Do not do this out of guilt. I will not be your charity case. Silas, it is not charity, Silas said. Then what is it? Duty? The mechanic fixing the machine? No, Silas shouted. The sound echoed in the vast chamber. He lowered his voice, struggling to find the words he had buried for 10 years. I am scared, Kaida. I am terrified. Of the heat? She asked. Of you, he admitted. Of how much I want this. She went still. Part of me. The part I locked away in the sanctum. It wants to tear the world apart for you. Silas confessed. He was crying now, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. I built my whole life around control because I thought desire was a poison. I thought if I wanted something, I would destroy it. He looked at his hands. I don't want to save you because it is the right thing to do. I want to save you because the thought of a universe without you in it is unbearable. Kaida looked at him. The fire in her eyes softened, shifting from the harsh glare of a reactor to the warm glow of a hearth. She reached out, her clawed hand hovering near his face. Silas, she said gently, desire isn't the enemy. Dishonesty is. You locked yourself in a cage and called it a temple. She touched his cheek. Her skin was hot, but it didn't burn him. It felt grounding. Use your vow as a compass, she whispered. Not a weapon against yourself. If you choose this, choose it freely. Not to save me, but to find yourself. Silas leaned into her touch. He closed his eyes, feeling the heat seep into his skin, melting the ice that had encased his heart for a decade. He took a deep breath. He opened his eyes. I choose you, he said. He didn't say anything else. He didn't recite a prayer. He didn't check the time. He leaned forward and kissed her. The contact was explosive. It wasn't just physical. It was a neural collision. As their lips met, the bond that Harlan had described slammed into place. Silas gasped as a wave of golden light flooded his vision. He felt her pain, her fear, and the immense crushing weight of the heat trapped in her blood. And then, he felt the release. It was like opening a floodgate. The energy roared out of her, pouring into him, but it didn't kill him. His body, tuned to hers by the proximity of the last few days, accepted the load. He became the ground for her lightning. The air around them shimmered, and the water on the floor evaporated into a thick mist. Silas pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her wings, pulling her flush against him. The heat was intense, sweating the clothes off their backs, but it was no longer destructive. It was a rhythm, a shared heartbeat, two broken systems finding equilibrium. An hour later, the silence in the water plant was absolute. Kaida lay with her head in Silas's lap. Her wings were relaxed, the scales cool to the touch. The fever was gone. Her skin was pale again. The terrifying luminescence faded to a healthy flush. Silas stroked her hair. He felt exhausted, drained, but strangely light. The heavy weight of the vow, the rigid iron thing he had carried for so long, was gone. In its place was something quieter, a promise kept, not out of fear, but out of truth. Kaida shifted, looking at the datapad Silas had propped up on his knee. While she slept, he had been analyzing the data shard from her bracelet. You were right, Silas said quietly. About what? She murmured, her voice sleepy and content. The conspiracy. He turned the screen toward her. I ran a cross-reference on the biotech markers in your blood data versus the Imperial Registry. The acceleration of your cycle. It wasn't an accident, and it wasn't just a fail-safe. He pointed to a name on the file, Senator Valerius. The acceleration was triggered remotely. Silas explained. They used a carrier wave to speed up your metabolism. They wanted you to go critical. Why? Kaida asked, sitting up. Because of this, Silas said. He scrolled to the bottom of the document. Project Vermilion Goal. Secure Dragon Blood Heir. Rewrite succession protocols. They didn't just want a weapon, Silas said, his voice cold. They wanted a lineage. If you bonded with one of their agents, if you produced an heir under their control, that child would have a legitimate claim to the ancient treaties. They could override the Senate. They could stage a coup legally. Kaida stared at the screen, her hands curled into fists. They tried to force me into heat so I would bond with one of their studs, she realized. To breed a puppet emperor. Yes, Silas said, but you escaped. And now I have bonded with a mechanic, she finished, a dark smile touching her lips. Silas looked at her. Which means their plan is broken, and you are useless to them as a breeding stock. But I am dangerous to them as a witness, Kaida said. She stood up, her strength returning fully now. She stretched her wings, the joints cracking. She looked powerful. She looked regal. They wanted a monster, she said. Let's go to the capital station and show them what a dragon really looks like. Silas stood up beside her. He picked up his tool belt. He checked his blaster. They stand in the mist, no longer a monk and a fugitive, but partners staring down an empire. Let's go, Silas said. They walked toward the exit, leaving the shadows behind. The celestial spire did not look like a weapon. It looked like a diamond caught in the throat of a god. Floating in the upper atmosphere of the gas giant, the station was a masterpiece of white durasteel and transparent aluminum, a gleaming needle that pierced the clouds. It was beautiful, sterile, and silent, the exact opposite of the chaotic, sweating desperation of Vector 9. Silas Caney adjusted the collar of his stolen maintenance uniform. It was tight around the neck, scratching against his skin. Beside him, Kaida stood tall in the gray and silver dress uniform of an Imperial logistics officer. The credentials Harlan had forged were embedded in the data pad she clutched, but no algorithm could disguise the way she walked. She moved like a tiger forced to wear a collar. Keep your head down, Silas murmured, his voice barely audible over the hum of the transit tub. And try to look bored. Imperial officers are always bored. I am not bored, Kaida replied, staring straight ahead at the polished white doors. I am terrified, and this fabric itches. The tub slowed. A pleasant synthetic voice chimed. Level 40, Senate Rotunda and Biological Preservation Sector. The doors slid open. They stepped out into a corridor that smelled of lavender and recycled oxygen. It was blindingly bright. The walls were lined with vertical gardens behind glass, lush greenery that had never known a natural wind. 2 security drones hovered past, their sensors sweeping the hallway. Silas held his breath. The drones paused, blue light washing over Kaida's badge. Identity confirmed. Lieutenant Vane, proceed. The drones moved on. Silas exhaled, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The tension here was different from the moon or the Freeport. It was a cold, suffocating pressure. Every surface reflected their faces, every shadow felt like a trap. We are in, Silas said. The server room is 3 junctions down. If the medic's intel is right, the station schematics are hard-lined there. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing too loudly on the marble floor. Kaida was shivering. Silas noticed the tremor in her hands as she adjusted her cap. The projection mesh Harlan had repaired was holding, hiding her horns and wings, but he could feel the heat radiating from her again. It was subtle at first, just a warmth in the air, but it was growing. Are you all right? Silas asked, glancing at her. The closer we get to the core, Kaida whispered, wiping a bead of sweat from her temple. It feels like something is pulling at my blood, like a magnet. We will find the records and get out, Silas promised. They reached the server room. It was an unmarked door that looked like every other panel in the wall. Silas pulled a decoder interface from his belt, no longer counting it like a prayer bead but wielding it like a weapon. He slotted it into the port. The lock cycled. Green light. They slipped inside. The room was a forest of data towers, cooling fans whirring in the dark. Silas went straight to the primary terminal. His fingers flew across the keys, bypassing the outer firewalls with the codes they had stripped from the bounty hunters' comms. He pulled up the station's architectural layout. There, Silas pointed, the central chamber. It is not a reactor. Kaida leaned in, the heat from her body fogging the screen slightly. It is labeled the reliquary. She read. Silas tapped a command, expanding the file. The schematic rotated. In the center of the station, suspended in a magnetic containment field, was an object. It was jagged, asymmetrical, and pulsing with an energy signature that matched Kaida's own biology perfectly. It is an artifact, Silas realized. Ancient tech, pre-Empire. It is dragon blood tech, Kaida said, her voice dropping. That is why I feel it. It is singing to me. Silas opened a sub-window, digging into the classified Senate logs attached to the artifact's energy grid. The text scrolled by, dense with bureaucratic euphemisms. Project Vermilion. Silas read aloud. Objective, activation of planetary defense override. He froze as he read the next line. Key requirement, biological resonance from Subject 0. That is me, Kaida said. I am the key. Silas kept reading, and the horror bloomed in his chest like ink in water. It is not just a weapon, he said, his voice hollow. It is a coup. There are two factions. One wants to destroy you to justify martial law, claim the dragons have returned to burn the galaxy. The other wants to use you. If they force you to interface with that artifact, you can shut down the defense grids of every system in the core. He scrolled further. Method of control, induced dependency. The subject has been genetically altered to require high-frequency thermal release. By controlling access to a bondmate, we control the asset. They made you sick on purpose, Silas said, the rage making his vision blur, so they could sell you the cure. He typed in a new search string, sanctum involvement. The screen flashed. A new file opened. It was a personnel file. It was his file. Silas stared at the image on the screen. It was him, 10 years younger, shaving his head on the day of his initiation. Subject, Silas Kane. Status, active monitor. What is this? Kaida asked, touching his arm. Silas read the text. The vow of the Hollow Reed is a psychosomatic monitoring protocol. Implanted biotrackers in the initiate's brainstem record emotional suppression and hormonal variance. Data is fed directly to Senate intelligence to map population compliance. Silas stepped back from the console as if it had bitten him. It wasn't just a vow, he whispered. He felt sick. He felt violated. They were watching me. Every time I prayed, every time I suppressed a thought, every time I denied myself, I was feeding them data on how to control people. He looked at his hands. I wasn't a monk, he said, his voice breaking. I was a lab rat. Silas, Kaida said firmly. She grabbed his shoulders, turning him to face her. Her grip was strong, hot enough to sting through the fabric of his uniform. Look at me. He looked up. Her eyes were burning with that familiar, terrifying gold fire. They built the cage, she said. But you are the one who lived in it, and you are the one who broke out. Do not let them take your past. She winced, a spasm of pain crossing her face. We need to move, she gasped. The pull. It is getting stronger. Silas shook his head, clearing the shock. He shoved the betrayal down. There would be time to mourn his faith later. Right now. There was a woman to save. He downloaded the files to a data spike. We have the proof. Now we need to stop the activation. They moved deeper into the station, toward the reliquary. The corridors became wider, the luxury more opulent. They passed banquet halls set for ghosts and observation decks looking out over the swirling storms of the gas giant below. Kaida was deteriorating fast. The proximity to the artifact was acting like a siphon, dragging the energy out of her cells and then slamming it back in with double the force. She was leaning heavily on Silas, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The projection mesh finally failed. They were in a service corridor near the core when it happened. A spark popped at her collar, and the hologram dissolved. Her wings burst free, tearing the back of the gray uniform. Her horns, sharp and obsidian, caught the overhead lights. Silas caught her as she stumbled. I cannot hide it, she wheezed. It is okay, Silas said. We are almost there. They reached the heavy blast doors of the reliquary. Silas didn't bother with the keypad. He used his laser cutter, slicing the locking mechanism. The doors groaned and parted. The chamber beyond was vast. It was a cathedral of glass and steel, dominated by the object in the center. The artifact was a massive shard of crystalline rock, floating above a pit of blue energy. It pulsed with a heartbeat rhythm, thump, 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 that vibrated in the floor. Kaida cried out, clutching her chest. It is loud. Silas dragged her toward the control console at the edge of the pit. If I can reverse the polarity of the containment field, Silas said, his hands flying across the unfamiliar controls. I can dampen the signal. I can shield you from it. He hacked into the system. The screen was a wall of alien syntax and imperial code. He used every trick he knew, rerouting power, scrambling sensors, creating feedback loops. The artifact pulsed brighter. A beam of light shot out, scanning the room. It sees me, Kaida whispered. Silas worked faster. Sweat dripped into his eyes. Come on, come on. He slammed the enter key. For a second, it worked. The blue energy field turned a soft, calming green. The thrumming noise faded. Kaida took a deep breath, her shoulders dropping as the pressure lifted. Silas laughed, a short, hysterical sound. I did it. I engineered a... The console exploded. Sparks showered over them. The green light vanished, replaced by a screaming red alarm. The artifact roared, a sound like metal tearing, and the gravity in the room lurched sideways. Biological key detected. A mechanical voice boomed from the walls, initiating bond sequence. Security alert. Sector lockdown. It didn't work. Kaida screamed over the noise. It just woke it up. Blast doors began to slam shut around the perimeter. Red lights strobed. Run! Silas yelled. They sprinted for the maintenance hatch in the far wall, the only exit not yet sealed. They dove through it just as a heavy shutter crashed down, severing the room from the rest of the station. They were in the walls now, a narrow, dimly lit crawl space filled with pipes and humming machinery. It was cramped, hot, and deafeningly loud with the sound of the station's alarms. Silas pulled Kaida deeper into the shadows, finding a small alcove behind a massive air recycler. It was a dead end. They collapsed against the metal grating. The world outside was a cacophony of sirens and shouting voices, but in here, the noise was a distant thunder. It was intimate. Terrifyingly so. Kaida was on the floor, her back against the pipes. She was convulsing. The failed attempt to dampen the artifact had backfired catastrophically. Instead of shielding her, it had triggered the final stage of her cycle. Her skin was glowing so bright it illuminated the dark space. Her eyes were wide, unseeing, lost in a haze of agony. "Silas," she gasped. Her voice was a ruin. "It is the cascade, my heart." Silas knelt beside her. He ripped off his jacket, trying to fan her, trying to do anything. "I can try to bypass the door," he said frantically, reaching for his tools. "We can find a medical bay, we can—" "Stop," she said. She reached out and grabbed his hand. Her touch was searing. "You cannot fix this with a wrench." "Silas." Silas froze. He looked at her. He saw the truth in her eyes. The science had failed. The engineering had failed. The clever tricks and the fast talk were gone. There was nothing left but the biology and the choice. "I am dying." "Silas," she said. She didn't sound afraid anymore. She sounded resigned. "I will not let them take me. I will burn out before I let them put me in a cage." "No," Silas said. He grabbed her shoulders. "No, I refuse." He looked at her, stripping away the panic, stripping away the monk, stripping away the engineer. "I know what the sanctum did to me," he said, his voice fierce. "I know my vow was a lie they sold me. But what I feel right now, this is not a lie." He leaned closer, ignoring the heat that was blistering his skin. "I do not care about the prophecy. I do not care about the politics. I care that you are the only thing in this universe that makes sense to me. I want you alive." Kaida looked up at him. Tears evaporated on her cheeks before they could fall. "Silas," she whispered, "if you do this, if you cross this line, there is no going back. The sanctum will hunt you. The empire will hunt you. You will never be clean again." "I do not want to be clean," Silas said. "I want to be real." He took a breath, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. "But I will not do it to save you," he said, echoing her words from the tunnel. "I will not make you a project." "Then why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Because I want you," he said. The truth hung in the air, naked and absolute, not just to save your life. "I want you." Kaida stared at him. She saw the fear in his eyes, but she also saw the love. It wasn't the transactional love of the empire, or the conditional love of the sanctum. It was messy, human, and terrified. She let out a sob that broke the tension. "Then choose me," she whispered. "Not because you have to, but because you are mine." Silas nodded. He reached for the fasteners of his tunic. "I choose you," he said, "never without truth, never without consent, and never without love." He pulled her into his arms. The heat was overwhelming. It felt like stepping into a star. But this time, Silas didn't flinch. He embraced it. He let the fire burn away the monitoring chips, the years of silence, the fear of his own humanity. When he kissed her, the world outside the maintenance shaft ceased to exist. There were no alarms, no soldiers, no artifacts. There was only the friction of skin, the desperate tangle of breath, and the profound, earth-shattering relief of two lonely things finally colliding. It was frantic at first, driven by the biological imperative that was tearing her apart. But then, as the connection deepened, it slowed. It became a conversation without words. It was the rewriting of a vow, not on paper, but on the soul. Silas felt the energy pouring out of her, a tidal wave of heat and light. But instead of destroying him, it anchored him. He felt the bond lock into place, not the artificial shackle the Empire wanted, but a bridge, a shared circuit. The station trembled around them. The lights in the maintenance shaft flickered and died, then surged back with a blinding intensity. Silas held her. He held her through the pain, through the pleasure, through the breaking of the world. And as the climax hit them, the artifact in the chamber next door screamed in resonance, a sound that shattered glass 3 levels up. Then, darkness. Silas woke to the sound of steady breathing. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. He was lying on the metal grating, his uniform bundled under his head. He turned. Kaida was lying beside him. Her wings were curled around them both like a protective shell. She was cool. Silas sat up, panic flaring for a second. He touched her shoulder. She was warm, living, human warm, but the furnace heat was gone. The deadly radiation was gone. She opened one eye. It was gold, bright and clear. The fever haze had vanished. "You are staring," she murmured, her voice raspy but steady. "You are cool," Silas said, wonder in his voice. "I am stable," she corrected. She stretched, a long, languid movement that made her joints pop. "And I am incredibly hungry. Do you have any of that protein paste?" Silas laughed. It was a rusty, unused sound, but it felt good. He scrubbed his face with his hands. "No paste, just us." He looked at her, really looked at her. The tension that had defined her face since he found her in the wreck was gone. She looked younger, softer. "And you?" she asked, sitting up and pulling her flight suit back into place. "How is the monk?" "The monk is dead," Silas said. He looked at the spot on his wrist where the sanctum tattoo used to be. It was still there, but it felt like ink now, not a brand. "I am just Silas, she repeated, testing the name. "I like him. He is less grumpy." She leaned in and kissed him. It was soft, teasing, and completely devoid of the desperation that had driven them before. "Thank you," she whispered against his lips. Silas held her face in his hands. The alarms had stopped. The station was eerily quiet. "That is suspicious," Silas said, his engineer's brain catching up to reality. Kaida stood up. She walked to the small viewport in the maintenance door. She looked out at the corridor. "Silas," she said, her voice serious again. He joined her. The blast doors to the reliquary were open. The artifact was glowing a steady, pulsating blue, but the data screens on the wall, they were flashing. "Bond confirmed, pairing complete, access granted to Subject 0 and Consort." "Consort," Silas read. "That is me?" Kaida looked at him. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. "It seems the artifact recorded our session. It recognized the biofeedback. It thinks we are the legitimate rulers of the system." Silas groaned. "So we didn't just break the rules. We accidentally stole the keys to the castle. And every sensor in this station just watched us do it," Kaida added. She turned to him. The humor was there, but beneath it was steel. "They know what we are now. Silas, there is no hiding. We are fully targeted. The Senate, the Sanctum, the cartel. They will all come for us." Silas picked up his laser cutter. He clipped it to his belt. He felt fear. Yes, but he didn't feel paralyzed by it. He felt grounded. He had a partner. "Let them come," Silas said. He reached out and took her hand. Her fingers interlaced with his, strong and sure. Kaida kicked the maintenance door open. They step out of the shadows, hand in hand, walking into the bright, hostile lights of the corridor. Not as fugitives running away, but as a united front walking toward the war. The celestial spire was no longer a monument to order. It was a cage of panic. The alarms that blared through the crystalline corridors were not the rhythmic pulses of a drill, but the chaotic shrieks of a station in collapse. Holographic screens that usually displayed stock indexes and weather reports now flashed a singular, terrifying image. A microscopic view of a jagged black cell devouring a healthy red one. "Alert," the automated voice droned, calm and synthetic against the backdrop of screaming civilians. "Biothreat level 6 detected. The dragon plague is airborne. All citizens must report to containment sectors for mandatory screening. Resistance will be met with lethal force. Silas Caney pushed through the crush of bodies in the transit terminal, keeping his head down. Beside him, Kaida moved with a grim efficiency, her face hidden beneath the hood of a stolen technician's cowl. The crowd was a terrified animal, shoving and trampling to get to the sealed blast doors of the containment zones. "They are lying," Kaida whispered, her voice tight with fury. "There is no plague. My biology is not contagious. It does not matter if it is true," Silas replied, scanning the upper walkways where Sanctum enforcers stood with pulse rifles. "It only matters that they believe it. Look." He nodded toward a large hollow wall above the crowd. A Sanctum prelate, his robes pristine white, was preaching to the camera. "The alien corruption is not just in the blood," the prelate intoned, his eyes staring directly into the lens. "It is in the desire. The beast lures you with heat and promise. Only the pure will be spared. Submit to the scan. Submit to the silence. They are using the scare to justify mass detentions," Silas realized. "They are locking down the station so the Senate cannot vote to stop them." "We need to get to the rotunda," Kaida said. "We need to show them I am not a sickness." They ducked into a service alcove as a squad of security drones buzzed past. The tension between them was palpable, vibrating in the air like a plucked string. Since the moment in the maintenance shaft, since the bond had snapped into place, Silas felt a constant low-level hum in his nervous system. It was an awareness of her. He knew where she was without looking. He knew she was afraid, not for herself, but for him. Silas stopped, grabbing her arm. Kaida turned, her golden eyes searching his face. "What is it?" she asked. "I can feel you," Silas said, "the confession raw. It is not just the heat anymore. It is presence. It feels like a drug." "Kaida." He saw the hurt flash across her face before she could hide it. "You think you are addicted," she said, pulling her arm back slightly. "You think this is just another version of what you did to your wife, using me to feel something." "No," Silas said, stepping closer. "I am afraid that I will want it too much, that I will stop seeing you and only see the feeling. And I am afraid," Kaida countered, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper, "that you only love me because I am burning. That if I were cold, if I were safe, you would not need to be my hero. I do not want to be a life support machine that you have to maintain." "Silas." Silas reached out, taking her hand. His palm was cool against hers. "You are not a machine," he said firmly. "And I am not a monk anymore. This bond, it is loud, it is overwhelming. But I am choosing to hold your hand right now, not because the biology demands it, but because I want to hold your hand." Kaida looked at their interlaced fingers. She squeezed, a sharp pressure. "A choice," she said, repeated freely. "Repeated freely," Silas agreed. A hiss from the ventilation grate above them broke the moment. "Touching scene," a voice echoed from the vent. "But if you two are done defining the parameters of your relationship, we have a revolution to schedule." The grate popped open, and a pair of boots dropped to the floor, followed by a man in a janitor's jumpsuit wearing a wig that looked like a deceased rodent. It was Harlan, the medic from Vector 9. "Doc?" Silas asked, blinking. Harlan adjusted the wig. "I prefer tactical sanitation specialist right now. The heat is on. Kids, the cartel has locked down the hangars. I barely got my shuttle into the waste disposal bay." "You came back," Kaida said, sounding surprised. Harlan shrugged. "I hate the Empire more than I love breathing. Plus, I brought friends." He gestured to the shadows behind him. 3 figures stepped out. They were cloaked, their movements fluid and silent. when they lowered their hoods. Silas saw the faint shimmer of scales on their necks and the vertical pupils of their eyes. Dragon bloods. Kaida breathed. Refugees, Harlan corrected. Working in the subdecks as pipe fitters and loaders, they heard the broadcast. They heard about the woman who shielded the club on Vector 9. They want to help. One of the refugees, a tall woman with scarred wings folded tight against her back, stepped forward. She bowed her head to Kaida. "We thought we were the last." The refugee said, "We thought the fire was gone." "It is not gone," Kaida said, her voice strengthening. "It was just sleeping." Harlan clapped his hands. "Touching reunion later. Right now, we have a problem." I pulled some data from the medical waste logs on my way in. The cartel isn't just relying on the plague scare. They have a backup plan. He pulled a data pad from his belt and projected a schematic. It showed a DNA helix being stripped and reassembled. "Cloning?" Silas asked, recognizing the markers. "Worse," Harlan said. "Replication without consciousness. They are using the station's DNA banks. They have your genetic sequence, Kaida, from the blood you lost in the crash. They are growing a biological key, a hollow copy of you, brain dead, but genetically identical." If they have a copy, Silas realized, the blood draining from his face, they do not need Kaida to activate the artifact. They can plug the clone into the machine and trigger the planetary defense override. "They will declare martial law," Kaida said. "They will claim the dragons attacked, use the clone as proof, and the Senate will vote to give the cartel absolute power." "We have to split up," Silas said. He looked at the map Harlan was projecting. "The DNA vault is in the lower laboratory sector. I can go there. I can destroy the sample and the clone, and I will go to the Senate floor," Kaida said. Silas looked at her. "That is suicide. Every camera in the system is looking for the monster." "Exactly," Kaida said. "I will give them one. If I show them the truth, if I show them I am not a mindless beast, it will fracture their narrative. I need to draw their attention while you stop the clone." She turned to the refugees. "Can you get me to the atrium outside the Senate chamber?" The scarred woman nodded. "We know the service lifts." Silas grabbed Kaida's shoulders. "Be careful. Do not let them bait you. They want you angry. They want fire." "I will give them fire," Kaida said, her eyes flashing. "But it will be my fire, not theirs." She leaned in, kissing him hard, a promise and a goodbye wrapped in one. "Go," she commanded. Silas turned to Harlan. "Get me into that lab. Doc." The DNA vault was a fortress of white ceramic and blue force fields. Silas and Harlan moved through the ventilation ducts above it, watching the technicians below. They were moving with urgent haste, prepping a large cylindrical tank in the center of the room. Inside the tank floated a figure. It was Kaida, but it wasn't her. The face was slack, the eyes open and vacant, devoid of the fierce intelligence that defined her. It was a meat puppet, grown in a tube to enslave a galaxy. "That is the most horrifying thing I have ever seen," Harlan whispered. Silas didn't speak. He felt a cold, sharp rage settling in his gut. This was the ultimate expression of the Empire's philosophy. Remove the soul, keep the function, use the body, discard the person. He dropped from the vent, landing silently behind a row of server banks. He signaled Harlan to take the west side. Silas moved toward the main console. He needed to spike the temperature of the tank, to denature the proteins before the clone could be decanted. He reached the terminal. His fingers hovered over the keys. "Identify," a mechanical voice challenged. Silas didn't have a code. He had a laser cutter. He jammed the tool into the data port and pulled the trigger. Sparks showered the floor. The security system shrieked, but the lock disengaged. He typed in the command, "Purge." A heavy hand clamped onto his shoulder. Silas spun, driving his elbow back, but he hit armor. A Sanctum enforcer stood there, face hidden behind a polished white mask. The enforcer threw Silas across the room. He crashed into a tray of vials, glass shattering around him. Two more enforcers stepped out of the shadows, and behind them, a man in a lab coat. Senator Valerius. Silas gasped, struggling to stand. The senator smiled. He looked like a grandfather, kind and wrinkled, but his eyes were dead sharks. "Mr. Caney," Valerius said smoothly, "the wayward monk. I must say, your biometric data has been fascinating to watch these last few days. The spikes in your dopamine and oxytocin levels are unprecedented. You are quite besotted with the asset." "She is not an asset," Silas spat. "She is a person. She is a biological locking mechanism," Valerius corrected. "And we have just forged a spare key." He gestured to the tank. The fluid was draining. The clone's chest was rising and falling. "Kill him." Valerius ordered the enforcers. Silas scrambled back. He was an engineer, not a soldier. He grabbed a canister of liquid nitrogen from the broken rack and threw it. He fired his laser cutter mid-air. The beam hit the canister. It exploded in a cloud of freezing fog. The enforcers recoiled, their visors icing over. Silas didn't run away. He ran toward the console. He couldn't destroy the tank, the armor was too thick, but he could destroy the lie. He jammed his comlink into the station's public address system. "Harlan," Silas yelled into his headset. "Patch me through. I need a station-wide broadcast. I am working on it." Harlan's voice crackled. "I need 10 seconds. Silas ducked as a pulse bolt scorched the wall above his head. He looked at the camera mounted on the console. Now. In the grand atrium outside the Senate chamber, chaos was blooming. Kaida stood in the center of the vast open space, surrounded by a ring of security forces. Above her, on the balconies, hundreds of terrified civilians and bureaucrats watched. She had dropped the disguise. Her wings were spread wide, shimmering with iridescent light. She stood tall, her hands open, showing she held no weapon. "I am not your plague," she shouted, her voice amplified by the acoustics of the hall. "I am not your enemy." A man stepped out from the line of guards. He wore the black uniform of Imperial Intelligence. The handler. "Look at it," the handler shouted to the crowd and the cameras. "It speaks. It mocks us. It burns with the fever that will kill you all." He raised a device in his hand, a sonic agitator. He pressed the trigger, a high-pitched frequency, inaudible to humans but agony to a dragon blood, slammed into Kaida. She screamed, falling to her knees, her vision blurred. The pain triggered her defense mechanisms. Her skin began to glow brighter, the heat rising uncontrollably. "See?" the handler yelled. "It goes critical. It is a bomb! Fire!" A guard shouted. Kaida saw the rifles raising. She saw the civilians on the balcony, a mother clutching a child, staring down in horror. If she fought back, she would prove them right. If she unleashed her fire, she would kill the innocent. She gritted her teeth against the sonic scream. She folded her wings around herself, not to shield from the bolts, but to contain her own heat. She took the pain. She took the shots. Stun bolts slammed into her wings. She shuddered, but she did not strike back. "I will not burn you," she gasped. Suddenly, the massive holoscreens lining the atrium flickered. The image of the dragon plague vanished. In its place appeared Silas's face, bloodied and desperate, illuminated by the blue light of the lab. "Citizens of the Spire," Silas's voice boomed across the station. "You are being lied to." The handler looked up, furious. "Cut the feed!" But the feed continued. Silas held up a datapad. "There is no plague. Silas shouted. "The fever is engineered. Look at this." He displayed the files, the emails from Valerius, the orders to accelerate Kaida's cycle, the schematics for the clone. "They grew a copy in a tank," Silas yelled, panning the camera to show the vacuous floating body of the clone behind him. "They want to use it to trigger the planetary defense grid. They want to lock you in so they can rule you." A gasp went through the crowd on the balconies. The security guards in the atrium lowered their rifles, looking from the screen to the handler. "It is a trick," the handler screamed. "A rebel deepfake, and the sanctum." Silas continued, his voice shaking with rage. "My vow, your vows, they are not for your soul. They are tracking chips." He ripped the sleeve of his uniform, exposing the scar on his wrist. He grabbed a scalpel from the tray beside him and sliced into his own skin. "Silas!" Kaida screamed, watching the screen. Silas dug into his forearm. Blood welled up. With a grunt of pain, he pulled out a small metallic biochip. He held it up to the lens. "They are watching us," he roared. "They are monitoring our compliance. We are not faithful. We are livestock." The atrium erupted. The civilians on the balcony began to shout. The sanctum priests standing near the Senate doors looked at each other in panic. The narrative was shattering in real time. In the lab, Valerius lunged for the console, smashing the camera with the butt of a pistol. The screen went black, but it was too late. The truth was out, in the atrium. The handler pointed his weapon at Kaida. "Kill her, before the mob turns." But the guards didn't fire. One of them, a young sergeant, looked at the handler, then at the woman huddled on the floor who had refused to hurt them. "She is not fighting," the sergeant said. The handler snarled and fired his own weapon. The bolt hit Kaida in the shoulder. She fell back, crying out. That was a mistake. The refugees burst from the service lifts. The woman with the scarred wings leaped over the railing, landing between Kaida and the handler. She didn't have fire, but she had a wrench, and she swung it with the force of a lifetime of oppression. The handler went down. Riots broke out. Not the panic the cartel wanted, but a rebellion. Civilians tackled sanctum priests. Technicians began overriding door locks. Kaida stood up, clutching her bleeding shoulder. She looked at the camera Silas had used. "Silas," she whispered. In the lab, Silas was on the ground. Valerius stood over him, aiming a pistol at his head. "You ruined everything," Valerius said, his voice trembling with the petulant rage of a man who had never been told no. He reached for the release lever on the tank. "If I cannot have the Senate, I will take the station. I will wake the clone. I will trigger the artifact manually." He pulled the lever. The tank opened. The clone spilled out onto the wet floor, gasping its first mindless breath. Valerius grabbed the clone by the hair, dragging it toward the service lift that led to the reliquary. "You are coming with me." "Monk," Valerius said, gesturing with the gun, "you are going to open the door." The reliquary chamber was a scene of apocalyptic beauty. The artifact was spinning now, a vortex of blue light that whirled in the center of the room. The air tasted of ozone and ancient dust. Valerius threw Silas toward the control panel. "Connect the clone. Initiate the interface." Silas looked at the clone. It was shivering, its eyes rolling in its head. It had no mind, but it had the biological signature. If it touched the artifact, the system would accept the code. It would lock down the solar system. "I will not," Silas said. Valerius shot him. The bolt took Silas in the leg. He collapsed, screaming. "Do it!" Valerius shrieked. The doors behind them blew open. Kaida stood there. She was bleeding, scorched, and exhausted. But her wings were spread wide, filling the doorway. "Get away from him," she growled. Valerius laughed. He grabbed the clone and shoved it onto the interface platform. Too late. The clone touched the artifact. A beam of blinding light shot into the ceiling. The station groaned. The artificial gravity failed for a second, then slammed back down with crushing weight. Biological key accepted. The voice boomed. Planetary defense override initiated. Shield lock in T-minus 60 seconds. The screens showed the planetary shield grid activating, a net of energy that would trap billions of people under the cartel's boot. "We cannot stop it," Silas yelled, dragging himself up. "The sequence is locked." Kaida looked at the spinning vortex. She looked at the clone, which was convulsing as the energy poured through it. "There is one way," she said. She stepped forward. "The artifact is drawing power from the biological source. The clone is a weak signal. If I merge with it, if I give it the full source, I can overload the buffer. I can burn out the receiver." Silas realized what she meant. She wasn't talking about bonding. She was talking about integration, becoming part of the machine. "It will erase you," Silas said, the terror hitting him harder than the bullet. "It will wipe your mind. You will just be code in the system. Better to be code than a slave," Kaida said. She walked toward the light. "No!" Silas screamed. He tried to stand, but his leg gave out. He refused to accept it. He refused to let her be a sacrifice. He looked at the console. He looked at the clone. He looked at his own bleeding wrist. The vow is a monitoring protocol. An idea flashed in his mind. Desperate. Insane. Engineer logic applied to a spiritual problem. "Kaida, stop!" Silas shouted. "The trackers! My implant!" She paused, looking back. "It is a receiver!" Silas yelled, crawling toward the panel. "It receives data from the Sanctum servers. If I reverse the feed, if I patch the artifact's output through my vow chip, I can create a feedback loop," Kaida realized. "But you need a power source," Silas said. "You need to drive the signal." He looked at her. "Not into the machine, Kaida, into me." She understood. She ran to him. Valerius tried to stop her, firing wildly. But Harlan and the refugees poured through the door, tackling the senator to the ground. Kaida dropped to her knees beside Silas. "Do it," she said. Silas grabbed a cable from the console. He stripped the end with his teeth. He jammed the raw wires directly into the open wound on his wrist, connecting the station's mainframe to his own nervous system. He screamed. It felt like sticking his hand into a fusion drive. "Hold on to me," he gasped. Kaida grabbed his face. She didn't hold back. She unleashed everything, every ounce of heat, every joule of biothermal energy she had. She poured it into him. Silas became the bridge. The energy flowed from Kaida through Silas into the vow chip and back into the station's network. The system couldn't handle it. It was trying to process the raw, chaotic, beautiful data of a dragon's love through a chip designed for suppression and control. "Error," the voice screeched. "Logic failure. Emotional variance exceeds parameters." The artifact began to wobble. The blue light turned a violent violet. Silas felt his mind tearing apart. He saw flashes of code mixed with memories. Kaida laughing, the storm on the moon, the taste of the skewer in the market. "Break it!" Silas yelled. Kaida roared, her wings flaring white-hot. She pushed one final surge of power into him. The vow chip in Silas's wrist exploded. The feedback spike shot up the cable into the console and slammed into the artifact. The crystalline shard cracked. A shockwave of sound blasted through the room. The clone on the platform disintegrated into ash. The blue beam cut out. Sequence aborted. System reboot. The planetary shields flickered and died. Silence fell over the room. Silas lay on his back, breathing hard. His arm was a mess of burns and wire. Kaida slumped over him, unconscious. "Silas?" Harlan called out, running over. Silas blinked. He looked at Kaida. She was breathing. "We did it?" Silas croaked. Harlan checked the screens. "Shields are down. The Senate is in uproar. The cartel's private channels just went dark. You broke the internet, kid." Silas looked at Valerius, who was being zip-tied by the scarred refugee woman. The senator looked small and defeated, but Silas saw something else. On the far side of the room, a shadow moved. He turned his head. The clone was gone. But another figure, a tall man in a dark suit who had been standing in the observation gallery, was walking away. He paused at the door, looked back at Silas, and smiled. It wasn't Valerius. Valerius was just a puppet. That man. Silas whispered. "Who?" Harlan asked. Silas tried to point, but his hand wouldn't obey. The man stepped into the shadows and vanished. The mastermind, Silas realized, the one who designed the chips. Kaida stirred on his chest. She lifted her head, her golden eyes hazy but present. "Did we win?" she whispered. Silas looked at the broken artifact, the arrested senator, and the empty door where the real villain had just left. "We won the battle," Silas said, wrapping his good arm around her. "But I think the war just got more complicated." He closed his eyes, listening to the sound of her heartbeat against his own. It was the only rhythm that mattered. The celestial spire did not fall, but it certainly cracked. In the weeks following the exposure of the Vermilion Project, the station became a chaotic purgatory of hearings, tribunals, and nervous breakdowns. The Senate was in deadlock. The sanctum was in retreat, its priests hiding their branded wrists under long sleeves as the public began to ask uncomfortable questions about the true nature of their faith. Silas Caney stood on the observation deck of the secure safe house Harlan had procured. Looking out at the gas giant swirling below, the view was magnificent, but Silas felt like a man trying to stand upright on a ship that had lost its gyroscope. For 10 years, his life had been defined by a single rigid line, "Thou shalt not." It was a simple rule. It provided structure. It provided safety. Now, the line was erased. The implant in his wrist was a mass of scar tissue, burned out by the feedback loop that had saved the station. He was free, and he was terrified. "You are brooding again," a voice said behind him. Silas turned. Kaida stood in the doorway. She wore a simple tunic and trousers, civilian clothes that looked strange on a woman built for storms and sky. Her wings were folded tight against her back, and though the lethal fever was gone, her skin still held a faint, restless luminescence. "I am not brooding," Silas said. "I am calibrating." Kaida walked over to him, her movements prowling and restless. She leaned against the railing, looking not at the planet, but at the reflection of the room in the glass. "They want me to give a speech tomorrow," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "The Committee for Species Integration. They want me to stand on a podium and tell everyone how benevolent the Empire is for not murdering me." "You are a hero," Silas pointed out. "You saved the station. I am a mascot," she corrected sharply. "Before, I was a monster to be hunted. Now, I am a symbol to be polished. They do not see me, Silas. They see a victory lap. They see a political lever they can pull to make themselves look progressive." She gripped the railing, her claws digging into the metal. "I traded one cage for another," she whispered, "and I still have this ticking clock in my blood." Silas looked at her. The emergency procedure in the reliquary had drained the excess heat and bought them time, but it had not fixed the underlying flaw. The genetic engineering that forced her into dependency was still there. The cycle would return. The need would return. And next time, it might kill her. "We are not staying for the speech," Silas said. Kaida looked at him, surprised. We are not? Harlan found something, Silas explained. He has been digging through the encrypted files we stole from the lab. The cartel didn't build your biology from scratch. They modified it. They stole the base template from an archaeological site near the outer rim. He pulled up a hologram on his wrist comp. It showed a jagged arc of rock floating in deep space, overgrown with crystalline structures. The ring-world fragment of Solara, Silas said. It is an ancient dragon blood ruin. Harlan thinks the original genetic data is stored there. If we can find it, we can compare it to your DNA. We can see exactly what they changed. And fix it? Kaida asked, hope warring with skepticism in her eyes. And fix it, Silas confirmed. We can rewrite the code back to the factory settings. Kaida stared at the image of the ruin. To be free, she murmured. Not just from the Empire, but from the need. To own my own body again. She looked at Silas, and for the first time in days, the tension in her shoulders dropped. When do we leave? They stole a ship 3 hours later. It was becoming a habit. This time, it was a long-range courier vessel, fast and unremarkable. Harlan piloted, humming a tune that sounded suspiciously like a drinking song, while the 3 Dragon Blood refugees acted as crew. They slipped the station's perimeter patrol using codes Silas had lifted from the Senate mainframe before they locked him out. The journey to the outer rim took 4 days. 4 days of silence. Stars, and the unspoken weight of what lay ahead. Silas spent the time in the engine room, tinkering with the hyperdrive. It was an excuse. He was avoiding Kaida, not because he didn't want to be near her. He wanted that with an intensity that scared him, but because he didn't know how to be near her without the crisis. In the maintenance shaft, with alarms blaring and death imminent, the choice had been simple. Biology had dictated the terms. But now, in the quiet of deep space, he was a monk who had broken his vows. He was a man who had admitted he was starving. He didn't know how to sit at the table and just eat. Kaida found him under the sublight manifold. You are hiding, she said. Silas dropped his wrench. It clattered loudly on the deck. I am maintaining the ship, he said. You are maintaining your walls, she countered. She sat down on a crate, her wings shifting, rustling behind her. You are afraid that now that the adrenaline is gone, we will realize we made a mistake. No, Silas said quickly. He wiped his greasy hands on a rag. I am afraid that without the rules, I will become greedy. Greedy? I spent 10 years learning to want nothing, Silas said, looking at the floor. Now, I look at you, and I want everything. I want to talk to you. I want to hold you. I want to wake up next to you, and I am terrified that if I start taking what I want, I will stop asking if you want to give it. Kaida stood up. She walked over to him, stepping into his personal space. Silas, she said gently. Do you think I am a delicate flower? Do you think I cannot tell you no? Silas looked up. She was smiling, a small, crooked smile that made his breath catch. Boundaries are not walls. Silas, she said, they are doors. You can open them, you can close them, but you have to trust the person on the other side not to kick them down. She took his hand, the one with the scarred wrist. I trust you, she said. You are not the man who used his wife as a drug. You are the man who rewired a death machine to save a station. You have earned a little greed. Silas let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for a decade. He turned his hand over, interlacing his fingers with hers. We are arriving. Harlan's voice crackled over the intercom. And you two might want to come up to the bridge. This is weird. The Ringworld fragment was not just a ruin. It was a ghost story written in stone. It was a curved slice of a planet that had been destroyed eons ago, floating in the void. But it wasn't dead. As the ship approached, the sensors went wild. The rock was singing. "It is a resonance frequency," Silas said, watching the readouts on the bridge. "The entire structure is vibrating at a pitch just below human hearing." "It feels like home," Kaida whispered. She was standing at the viewport, her hand pressed against the glass. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the violet light of the nebulae that shrouded the ruin. Harlan set the ship down on a landing pad made of iridescent glass. They stepped out into an atmosphere kept in place by failing gravity fields. The air was thin and smelled of ozone and petrichor. All around them, towering spires of crystal rose from the rock, pulsing with a faint rhythmic light. "They are memory crystals," one of the refugees said, touching a pillar. "They store history." Kaida walked forward, drawn by an invisible current. She approached a massive archway in the center of the plaza. As she stepped through, the air shimmered. A hologram sprang to life. It wasn't the flickering blue light of Imperial tech. It was gold, solid and warm. It showed a dragon, fully transformed, magnificent and terrifying, shifting into a humanoid form. "Welcome, daughter of the blood." A voice spoke, not in ears, but in minds. Kaida fell to her knees. The hologram began to cycle through data. It showed the history of her people. It showed the bond, and it showed the truth. Silas watched as the diagrams floated in the air. He interpreted the biological data as Harlan scanned it. "It was never lethal," Silas said, his voice rising in anger. "Look at the baseline. The thermal cycle was seasonal. It happened once every 3 years. And it was voluntary. It was a celebration," Kaida said, tears streaming down her face. "It was not a dependency. It was a choice to share energy, a way to strengthen the community." Harlan spat on the ground. The cartel took a festival and turned it into a loaded gun. They accelerated the metabolic rate by a factor of 50 and removed the release valves. "They made me think I was born broken," Kaida whispered. She stood up, the grief hardening into a diamond-sharp resolve. "They made me beg for my life." She turned to Silas. "Fix it," she said. The procedure was prepared in the heart of the ruin, inside a chamber that acted as a bioresonance amplifier. Harlan set up the field generators while Silas worked on the interface. They had to rewrite her genetic code using the template from the archives. It required a massive energy transfer to push the new sequence into her cells. "We need a conduit," Harlan said, looking worried. "The ancient machines are powered down. We need a live nervous system to bridge the gap between the archive and her body." "I will do it," Silas said immediately. Harlan looked at him. "Silas, your neural pathways are fried from the last time. If you interface with this tech, without the VOW chip to act as a fuse, the feedback could stop your heart." "I survived it once," Silas said. "That was luck," Harlan argued. "This is suicide. It is necessary," Silas said. He looked at Kaida, who was lying on the stone plinth, hooked up to the ancient machines. "I am not doing this to be a hero," Silas told her, answering the question in her eyes. "I am doing this because I am the engineer, and you are the engine. We work together, or we don't work at all." Kaida reached out and took his hand. "If you die," she said fiercely, "I will bring you back just to kill you myself." "Understood." Silas smiled. He lay down on the adjacent plinth. Harlan connected the leads to Silas's temples and chest. "Initiating sequence," Harlan said. The world turned white. Silas felt the data hit him like a physical wave. It wasn't the cold binary code of the Empire when it was heavy. emotional, ancient data. He felt the memories of 1,000 dragons, and he felt the flight, the fire, the song. He pushed it toward Kaida. He felt her accept it. He felt her body fighting the change. The cartel's engineered virus clinging to her cells like a cancer. Let go, Silas thought, projecting his will into the connection. You do not have to burn to be real, Kaida screamed. Her body arched off the stone. Her wings flared, blindingly bright. The heat in the chamber spiked to 400 degrees. Silas felt his heart stutter. The feedback was tearing him apart. Compassion, he told himself, anchoring his mind not on discipline but on the image of her face. Not control. Joy. Find the joy. He poured everything he had into the link, and then it snapped. The heat vanished. The light faded to a soft, golden pulse. Silas gasped, inhaling air that felt like razor blades. He rolled off the plinth, hitting the floor hard. Harlan was shouting, vital signs stabilizing. The rewrite it took. Her markers are returning to baseline. Silas dragged himself up. He looked at Kaida. She was sitting up. She looked exhausted, sweat matting her hair, but her eyes were clear. The frantic, desperate hunger was gone. The low-level vibration of impending death was gone. She took a deep breath. She held it. She let it out. It is quiet, she whispered. My blood. It is quiet. She looked at Silas. A smile broke across her face, radiant and free. I am just me, she said. Silas laughed, a weak, choked sound. Just you. Suddenly the ruins shook. An explosion rocked the plaza outside. Harlan checked his scanner. Proximity alert. Imperial gunship. The doors to the chamber blew inward. Silas and Kaida scrambled for cover behind the stone plinths as laser fire scorched the ancient carvings. A figure stepped through the smoke. It was a man in a pristine gray suit, flanked by 4 combat droids. It was the man from the reliquary. The mastermind. Director Corell, Silas said, recognizing the face from the deep web searches Harlan had run. The architect of the Vermilion Project. Corell smiled, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked bored, as if he were attending a dull board meeting rather than a raid on an alien ruin. Touching, Corell said, his voice smooth and cold. You fixed the prototype. I must thank you. The cartel was struggling to reverse engineer the original stability protocols. You have saved us billions in RD. He gestured to the droids. Kill the spare. Secure the female. I want her intact. We have a cloning facility on Mars that is waiting for the corrected genome. Kaida stood up. She didn't look afraid. She looked furious. You think you can put me back in a bottle? She asked, her voice low and dangerous. I think I own the bottle, Corell replied. You are intellectual property, my dear, and your lease has expired. He signaled the droids. Silas looked at the console. He looked at the massive memory crystals surrounding the room. Harlan, Silas shouted. The crystals. They are recording media. Harlan blinked, then grinned. Oh, I like where this is going. Silas didn't reach for a weapon. He reached for the interface cable he had just disconnected. Kaida! Silas yelled. Keep him talking. Kaida stepped out from behind the plinth. She spread her wings. She didn't have the lethal heat anymore, but she had strength, and she had rage. You want the genome? She challenged Corell. Come and take it. Corell laughed. I don't have to take it, I just have to bleed you. He raised a heavy pistol. Silas jammed the cable into the broadcast port of the ruins communication array. Now! Silas shouted. Kaida didn't attack. She didn't fly. She simply looked at Corell and spoke, her voice amplified by the acoustics of the chamber. Identify yourself, she commanded. Corell sneered. I am Director Corell of the Imperial Science Division, and I am the man who is going to erase you. Silas hit the transmit key. The memory crystals pulsed. They didn't just record history, they broadcast it. The ancient dragons used them to sing across the stars. Silas patched the signal into the refugee network, the Senate emergency channel, and every newsfeed in the core systems. Coral's face, high definition, arrogant, and admitting to his crimes, was beamed to 50 billion screens instantly. "What did you do?" Coral demanded, seeing the crystals flare. "We refused the script," Silas said, standing up. "We didn't kill you, we just turned on the lights." Harlan held up his data pad. "You are trending. Director, the Senate Watchdog Committee just issued a warrant for your arrest, and 3 rival cartels just put a bounty on your head." Coral's face went pale. He looked at his comms unit. It was lighting up with panic. The droids hesitated. Their command protocols were linked to Imperial authority. When the warrant hit the network, their IFF tags switched Corel from commander to target. Target acquired. One droid droned. Corel scrambled back. "No! Override! I am the director. Civilian arrest authorized," the droid stated. Coral turned and ran. He sprinted out of the chamber, down the corridor of the ruin. "Let him go," Kaida said, stopping Harlan from raising his blaster. "He has nowhere to run," Silas added. "The galaxy knows his face now. He will spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder." They watched as the droids chased Corel into the maze of the ring world. The mastermind was no longer a shadow. He was prey. The sun setting over the ring world painted the crystal spires in hues of violent orange and soft purple. It was a beautiful, broken place, much like the 2 people sitting on the edge of the landing pad. Kaida sat with her legs dangling over the abyss. Silas sat beside her. They had been silent for a long time. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a quiet exhaustion. "How does it feel?" Silas asked. Kaida took a breath. "Normal," she said. "It feels quiet. I am not hungry. I am not dying. I am just here." She turned to him. The golden fire in her eyes was gentle now. "And you?" she asked. "How is the monk without a cause?" Silas looked at his hands. The scars on his wrist were fading, but the memory of the pain remained. "I have a cause," he said. "Oh?" Kaida raised an eyebrow. "And what is that?" "Building something," Silas said. "Not a wall, not a cage. Something that lasts." He turned to face her. "The cartel is broken," he said. "The mastermind is running. The Empire is distracted. We are free, Kaida. For the first time, we are actually free." Kaida looked at him. She reached out and touched his face. Her hand was warm, but it didn't burn. It was just the warmth of another living thing. "So," she said softly, "the vow of the Hollow Reed is gone. What replaces it?" Silas thought about it. He thought about the discipline that had saved him, and the fear that had nearly destroyed him. He thought about the woman sitting in front of him, who had taught him that being alive was messy and dangerous and worth every second. "A new vow," Silas said, spoken quietly. "Between us." "And what are the terms?" Kaida asked, a smile playing on her lips. "To choose freely," Silas said. "To never let fear make the decisions, and to never let anyone turn love into a cage." Kaida leaned in. Her forehead rested against his. "I accept those terms," she whispered. She kissed him. It wasn't a medical necessity, and it wasn't a desperate bid for survival. It was slow, deliberate, and deeply, terrifyingly human. It was a kiss that tasted of dust and stars and the promise of a future that hadn't been written yet. When they broke apart, Silas was laughing. He felt light. "So," he said, gesturing to the stolen ship behind them. "Where to?" Kaida stood up, offering him her hand. "Anywhere we want. Silas, anywhere at all." They walked up the ramp of the ship together. not as fugitive and savior, not as monk and monster, but as partners. The engine hummed to life. The ship lifted off the glass pad, turning its nose toward the vast open star field. Behind them, the ring world sang its ancient song, but they didn't need it anymore. They had their own music now. The thrusters fired, a streak of blue against the dark, and they vanished into the uncertain, beautiful infinite.